Hi, everyone. It's Tom from the MS Guide, and I'm here with a familiar face. Well, familiar to some of you. It's been a couple of years. Hi, Hamish.
Good morning. How are you
How you
doing?
doing?
I'm okay. I'm okay. Just living my life. Getting
Living my
just
life.
well.
You know, you know what? That's a really good thing because, folks, Hamish and I have got back together because it's been 2 years since Hamish had HSCT in Mexico. HSCT being stem cells, and it really sort of gets me as a patient. And I sit here and I hear people's stories, and there's, I think, unnecessary fear put around HSCT, which is a much, much safer procedure than it was when they started doing it, 20 years ago. And by the way, you've got to remember, this is MS, but HSCT has actually been used in hematology for a while. The hematologists look at the neurologists and just go, what's the big deal? And the neurologists all go, oh, and that drives a lot of people to Mexico, which is probably the primary outside the UK destination. And Hamish went to Mexico. And if you look on the channel, all of Hamish's whole trip from before, during, and after we recorded on the channel. So thanks again, Hamish, for letting us into your life in that little way to see that, because it's hard work at times, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, when I was in Mexico, I was trying to record as much as possible, and I'm not very. I'm a bit camera shy at the best of times, so I was having to just kind of force myself to do these things, and it was tiring to do, but I felt it was
Are you saying
important.
the camera work was the hard work, not the stem cells?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, when you're in Mexico, because they've done so many stem cell transplants there, it's so routine for them, So you go there and you just feel instantly kind of comfortable because they know what they're doing. They've done it so many times. It was like going to the dentist or going to the GP almost, with like just how normal it was for them to be just doing the things that they were doing. So, before I arrived there, I was kind of a little bit anxious about what was going to lie ahead. But then as soon as you arrive there,
Hmm.
everybody's just quite relaxed.
Yeah.
Nothing's too much bother for them, and they know precisely what they're doing, and they know exactly what to do if certain things arise.
Well, in fairness, the UK is like this, but it's for hematology, which is blood cancer, and 15% of the stem cell beds are, in theory, reserved for MS patients, but they're not used as much. But it's weird, Hamish. I find it in the neurology world, it's all like, oh, and the hematology, you're like, what's the big deal? Like you say, we do this every day. It's like going to the dentist and having your teeth cleaned. There's risks. Nothing is without risk. Cycling is not without risk. Crossing the road is not without risk. Stem cells, ibuprofen, anything. And it's managing it, isn't it?
Yeah, well, MS itself has a risk associated with it. It's a neurodegenerative condition.
Hey, you hit
I'd
the nail
rather
on the head.
I'd rather not wait for that particular bus to hit me. So that's why I opted to try and do whatever I could, and whilst I was, the youngest I was ever going to be, and potentially the fittest I was ever going to be,
Yeah.
to to get it sorted. And since then,
This is the
it's been
point.
great.
MS is not going away, is it? It's only going to get worse at different speeds with different severity. We can't tell what the future is going to hold. So you've just gone, right, bang, I'm going to nail this
Yeah,
up front
well,
and slow it down.
Well, prior to me going, I was kind of told that I might be in the 10% of MS patients that might not have that much disability. I was like, well, that still leaves me in the 90%. But, if
More
I was
than
to,
10% of people are told that. That's the sad thing. I think
well,
it's just a
totally,
comforting thing, whereas
yeah.
actually the person who says this to you doesn't rarely has to look you in the eye in 20 years' time and go, oh, sorry, maybe you are in the 90%.
But if somebody had asked me to cross the street and, told me that there was a 10% chance of me making it, I wouldn't be crossing that street. I'd be trying to find, some other way of resolving the issue. And that's what I was essentially doing with by going to Mexico.
You hit the nail on the head. There's a guy called Professor Schmirer in London, and he expressed to me once, he said, 1 in 10 people are likely to make it through their MS without much significant problems. But the problem is you can't tell who those 1 in 10 are. And it's like trying to cross the M25 blindfolded. You might be lucky, but 9 times out of 10, you ain't going to be lucky.
Yeah.
And you can't just hope that you're not that person. It's
Totally.
mad. Look, one of the reasons to get you back after 2 years is to say, so what's going on? How do you feel? So you sort of gone from many of us with MS sort of experiencing symptoms and things like that. You went to Mexico, you had your stem cells taken out, you had your immune system ablated, taken out, and then your stem cells reintroduced, and then you're back home, and it's 2 years on. I mean, are you working? What are you doing?
Yes. So I'm working full time. To be honest, just now my MS is 95% of the time in the background. I don't really think about it.
It's not a cure. It's the hardest set of breaks, isn't it?
Yeah. And that's the thing, is that I've still got some of the residual symptoms, and they'll probably be with me for the whole of my life, but nothing's getting worse, and I'm able to get out, do everything that I want to do. And for the most part, I don't think about MS. Whereas prior to me going to Mexico, I was really, kind of get hung up on it. Sometimes you just have these thoughts about, is it getting worse? And, what's going to happen? Am I going to deteriorate in the next few weeks? Is my medication working? And all these things are going through my head. But now I'm just kind of, living my life, going out, seeing friends, working full time. I'm able to exercise.
Remind us how long you've had MS from when you were given a diagnosis. How long ago was that?
So that was 2019. So
right.
I'm kind of 5 years, So it was kind of July 2019 that I was diagnosed, and then I was put on Tecfidera, which caused a whole heap of side effects for me. I used to go bright pink twice a day.
Oh, I was on the trial for that. I would go like a lob. If I wore a white shirt, it was hilarious because people look at me in meetings and go, "Are you okay?" I'm going,
"Oh yeah, these hot flashes, and it was just really quite uncomfortable. It gave me a whole heap of stomach issues as well. That I was told to just take, just a couple of bits of medication to try and prevent that, But I didn't. The thing was, I don't really enjoy taking drugs, and I don't really know if there's any long-term data on what these things do to you. And
I mean, I share your view. I'll take drugs for something, but I don't want to. Especially, you hear people. What's it called? Polypharmacy. They stack one drug on top of the other. Because this makes you feel a bit like this, and then they give you this one to help mitigate this one, which is mitigating that one, and all of a sudden you've got handfuls of pills you're swallowing with different side effects and, like you say, long-term effects.
Yeah. Well, that was kind of one of my concerns, and so as I say, I figured that having 4 rounds of chemotherapy, to ablate my immune system and then start it from scratch would maybe have a better long-term outcome for me.
It's called front-loading the risk, essentially. I mean, you do all the nasty stuff up front in one hit, and then it's a memory.
Yeah.
I broke my femur, and it was the most painful thing I've ever done, but that was 12 years ago. But it's just a memory. But at the time, it was everything. And when I was diagnosed 32 years ago, I know what you mean. It's in your head every 3 seconds, and you think, don't think about it, which makes you think about it. And don't
totally.
Yeah, and I mean, you seem to me, you've jumped from 2019 to now in 5 years. You've jumped to a stage that I feel like I might be at. I don't think about MS every 10 seconds. I think about it every 15 minutes. It sort of runs across my head, and I can deal with it because it's not a new thing anymore.
Yeah. I mean, for me now, I only really think about it whenever I'm maybe tired, or say I've got a bug that causes some of my residual symptoms to flare up. And that's kind of the main time that I'll end up thinking about it. But as I say, for the most part now, and that's probably one of the nicest things, and it wasn't really something that I was expecting, was that it's kind of given me that freedom and that headspace to not think about it, because I know that my symptoms are stable, and I know that I've done kind of everything that I can to prevent my MS from getting worse. So that gives me quite a high degree of comfort. To get HSCT is not the easiest thing to do in the UK. I mean, that's part of the reason why I went to Mexico.
But it costs you an arm and a leg. I mean, you had to essentially make a load of future sacrifices to pay for it now. And I mean, I find that nothing to do with you. I find it offensive somehow that people in the UK, essentially, HSCT is not a money earner for anybody, involved in it. And MS drugs are very, very good money. I'm not anti-pharma. I used to work for a pharma company, or more than one. But I can see how it's in their interest that you don't have HSCT because, that's just delaying any drugs that you might have that the NHS has to spend money on. And they were doing the math. If you do maths, sorry, I'm half Canadian, they were doing the maths and call it in the UK, I think it's these days about 45 to 50,000. But if you look at the cost of a drug like, say, for example, Ocrevus or Kesimpta or something, and you add up the yearly cost of that, it doesn't take long before that's vastly exceeded the cost of the stem cells. The economics.
Well, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think it's difficult to kind of broach these subjects without sounding like you're kind of some sort of conspiracy theorist or something, but I mean, I do wonder if there's an element of truth to it, but
I would say they don't, it's just, I think the conspiracy would be to say they act against it. I mean, look at you now, even stem cells rarely last forever, if that makes sense. But I know somebody who, after about 9 years, then went on to Ocrevus. But that was 9 years pretty much completely free of stuff. And, economically, there wasn't all that money. There wasn't all the side effects that you get, all the permanent immune suppression you get with the B cell depleters. And I mean, imagine being given a pass for even 10 years.
Yeah. But I mean, part of that is that then you'll see essentially the evolution of the MS medication. You might find some remyelination medication will then come into fruition, or there might be some better treatments that are less toxic on your body. So for me, part of the equation was, to appreciate that it might not be forever, but it will give you a grace period that might mean that in 10 years' time, the landscape might be completely different for MS. You don't really know.
It's buying time, isn't it? In some ways, it's got mystique around it, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's kind of intrinsically quite scary because if you talk about chemotherapy, people tend to kind of think about it in terms of like a cancer treatment.
It is.
Well, yeah. I mean, but invariably, if I tell somebody that I've undertaken chemotherapy, they automatically assume it's for cancer, And so I think that
I had alemtuzumab. I told an emergency doctor, my cousin, that I'd had chemotherapy, and he leant forward and went, "You got cancer?" And I said, but you're right. The cancer word, just people will do different things, and it conjures up different images, doesn't it?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, for me, I was more scared of becoming further disabled than the risk of, because chances of me getting further disability were much higher than the risk of death or mortality or any of the side effects that come along with the HSCT treatment. So I mean, I was more than comfortable for it, but I do appreciate that for some people that might be too severe. Might be too much of a risk.
But it's contextualizing it, isn't it, Hamish? It's the vast amount of MSers are out of work 10 years after diagnosis because of their MS. And do you want to be diagnosed? I mean, what were you in your late 20s?
Yeah, 20, 29. Yeah.
Yeah. And in your late 30s, suddenly be, should we say from 40 on, be part of the benefit system rather than being able to go out and get a job. I mean, the benefit system is the first thing that the governments attack when they want to come in and save money. I mean, whether it's whatever flavor of government.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even if aside from that, I'd much rather be able to be fit, healthy, and be able to go on holidays and trips and hang out with my friends and have a high quality of life. Be able to do kind of regular activities of daily living. Just, I don't want to just exist. I want to live a life. I can basically live a normal life. In fact, I'm probably much more active than 90% of my friends. I go out for long runs. I go on my Peloton. I go hiking, just on Sunday there, I just decided to go for a little walk. It turned into like an 11-kilometer hike up the hills in Edinburgh here, But like pre-HSCT, I felt kind of limited by my fatigue, There would be days where I just couldn't do anything, Whereas now I can do everything. Basically, I don't feel like it's a limitation factor at all for me anymore, which has been one of probably the game changers, like the big game changers for me. And that was
So that's the big takeaway. If you were going to rate the changes that you had, I don't want to put words in your mouth. I mean, is fatigue or the lack of?
Yeah, fatigue was up there for sure. So having the lack of fatigue now is just great. And I had pins and needles in my left hand, which I still do, but it's vastly improved. Now I kind of have, it's almost like a tell now. I know when I'm about to get ill because the tingling in my left hand, the pins and needles starts to get worse. And
Right.
that's normally
Yeah.
a sign before I get like a scratchy throat or a blocked nose or whatever. So I know I'm about to get unwell.
If I get a cold, I get clumsy and I think, oh, here comes.
Yeah. And it's quite an interesting kind of tell, because I was at the cinema a few weeks back and then my hand started tingling and I was like, all right, cool. I'm about to get something. And lo and behold, like the day later, I started having a scratchy throat, and I was I think for me, the actual treatment itself wasn't the hard part. For me, the 6 months after having the treatment was probably the hard part. Because when you're in Mexico, you're surrounded by kind of like-minded individuals who are all going under the same treatment. So there's almost kind of this blitz spirit kind of thing going on, which is
spirit. You're all hiding in your rooms. Yeah, I remember you had this. I mean, they've got a fantastic facility there, but yeah.
Yeah, so everyone, you're kind of there together. So you're able to chat things through. If anybody's got anxieties or concerns, whatever, you can chat to each other. And you're all undergoing the same thing. So it's actually kind of nice in that respect. But then as soon as you leave Mexico, you're kind of on your own. And then for me, it was like the next 6 months was the rehabilitation period. So you're then kind of waiting for your immune system to kind of get back into gear. So you're kind of isolating. So I was isolating for the next sort of 6 months, which is tough. I mean, it was particularly tough for my wife because she was kind of isolating with me, and she's an extremely sociable person.
The UK medics, I mean, were they absolutely? I'm being facetious here. Thrilled that you grabbed the bull by the horns and went and had HSCT in Mexico.
They were kind of indifferent, I would say.
Yeah,
probably
the neurologist that you were dealing with.
Yeah, I've only really had one appointment since. I'm coming up for my second year. Yeah, and the thing is, like
the usual MRI and how you doing kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. So they didn't really mind. I thought they'd maybe have more questions. Because for me, if I had a patient who was going on undertaking something that was kind of quite interesting, I'd be asking a lot of questions as to why or how, or just finding out some more information for my own interest. But that wasn't
sad. It's out of their comfort zone, I think, and also you're supposed to be the sort of subjugated person in this whole relationship, and all of a sudden you've grabbed the bull by the horns and said, "Thank you very much, but I'm off to Mexico." I remember you saying to me, because you live in Scotland, you don't just have a Scottish accent, you live there, and I remember you saying you asked a nurse, and she said, "Oh yeah, there's a stem cell pathway," and you said, "Oh right, yeah. How many people have done this?" And she went, "Oh, none." And you thought, right, I'm definitely going to have to sort this out myself.
Well, that was for me. As soon as I got diagnosed, I was doing my own research to find out what was the most effective treatments. And for me, I wanted to have the most effective treatment early on. And for me, the most effective treatment was stem cell transplant or HSCT. So day one, that was what I was asking for. I was asking for that treatment. And basically, I was then told it was a third line treatment, and I would have to essentially become more disabled before I would then be eligible for this.
More disabled in a way you can't turn it back. It's like, it's bizarre, isn't it? To win the prize, you're going to have to suffer for us.
Yeah, well, I mean, they didn't quite phrase it like more disabled, but essentially it amounts to the same thing. You got to fail two DMTs, and then
third line. I mean, and when you fail 2 DMTs, it's because the way failure is defined is you are objectively getting worse in terms of your function and stuff. And it's like you've got to demonstrate that you've lost a bunch of stuff that you'll never get back before they'll give you the really good stuff. Personally, I think it should be laid out and explained, because you're right, everything's a risk.
Yeah.
But it also needs to, and the conversation that never happens, or rarely, I think, is, and this is what MS is like in 10 years and in 20 years and in 30 years time. And a friend of mine, a medic in the States, he's got a big YouTube channel, Aaron Bosser, said, I sit the patient down and I say, I want metaphorically, you to leave the room, and I want the 60-year-old you to come back in. And I want to have a conversation with 60-year-old you about what you want to have achieved in life, because your medication choices now are going to affect how we can answer that question. I mean, nothing's perfect, nothing's guaranteed, but there's a heck of a lot of data.
Yeah. I mean, I wanted the most effective treatment, and the treatment that they were giving me. I mean, as I say, I went on Tecfidera first of all, not got the best rep, or not got the highest success statistics.
It was the best at the time, if that makes sense. I remember going on to the trial, and it was the next best thing. I'd been on injectables, which were then being considered. Somebody the other day in Northern Ireland wrote on a forum that this was a young man diagnosed with MS. This is the other day. This is 2024. And he was given the option of, I think, Copaxone or Rebif. And it's just like, he's just, your jaws open, by a person who doesn't have to probably look at them in 20 or 30 years' time, a young man who may want to, I'm presuming, be active and all this kind of stuff. And they get offered the 30% effective drugs versus the 50% or higher, or even, saying stem cells is an option. It depends, you may have to pay for it. But this conversation was never had with them.
Yeah.
It's just astonishing, Hamish, that, and when the damage is done, you're right, you can't undo it.
Yeah. And as I said earlier on, I appreciated that I was the youngest I was ever going to be, and I was going to be the fittest I was ever going to be.
10 minutes ago was the youngest I was ever going to be.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. So,
okay. What advice would you give people to wrap this up? If somebody in the UK took your view and just went, essentially, sod this, I'm going to do it, because you went to Mexico and you had to pay. But what advice would you give to somebody if they were newly diagnosed? Start saving now? I mean, what would it be?
I mean, apart from the actual costs involved with it, I don't really see any downsides to the treatment that I had in Mexico. The facilities there were great. I know that there's kind of a little bit of snobbery, I would suggest, towards Mexico in terms
of
its, well, yeah. I may, as a Scotsman, I may understate things slightly, but
ever since James I, it's all gone south, hasn't
it? Just a little bit. But so there's a little bit of snobbery associated. But then when you go to Mexico, I mean, you're essentially in a private healthcare facility, and the facilities were better than anything that I've experienced in the UK. Certainly, I wouldn't have any concerns about that. The treatment that they do there isn't as harsh, and it's not as dangerous as what a lot of the scare stories may give you. And then the actual process there, they've got it down to a T. They know precisely what they're doing. They're really quite good at laying the entire thing out on it. They give you kind of an app that tells you what you're going to be doing every single day, and then you get all of the medications and everything. So they what you're going to get yourself into for.
There's an app for everything.
Well, yeah, exactly that. Yeah. So it was just basically like a glorified calendar, but it told you precisely what was going to happen on each day, so you could kind of preempt what you could expect.
Right.
And then, as I say, they nailed it. They know what they're doing. It's so routine for them that there's nothing there that's really that scary. I think probably the big thing, as I kind of mentioned, the recovery is the hard part, or at least certainly it was for me. I know chemotherapy can be scary, and for some people, they had lots of side effects. They maybe had some nausea. For me, I kind of sailed through that part.
You did rather, didn't you? You didn't even. Disappointingly, you didn't get the curly hair.
I did get the curly hair.
I remember you having a head shaving party, and then I thought you were going to come back like Afro Man. But
I had chemo curls. I kind of looked like Bob Ross for a wee bit. So if you go on my Instagram, you can see a couple of photos from back then where I've compared myself to Bob Ross and my dad's Labradoodle.
Bob Ross. We're just going to make this a landscape.
But it was, so I did enjoy the chemo curls, actually, because they were slightly, because my hair is pretty straight.
But they didn't last, did
they? No, I had them for about maybe, I don't know, 4 or 5 months. And then I went to the barber's one day and he cut my hair. And then all of a sudden I went from having massively curly hair to having massively not curly hair, but I had to get my passport renewed in that time, and so my passport for the next 10 years is going to have me with curly hair, so at
All
least it's
right,
got a
excellent.
little
So you're Bob Ross lookalike. And so,
exactly.
in terms of advice for people, then we can say get your passport done beforehand because that's your photo for the next 10 years.
Yeah, well, that was an unexpected
Yeah,
bit
yeah.
of
Oh
advice
no,
there.
but it's a learning. I mean, but seriously, so it costs money. These days it costs around £70,000, I think.
Yeah, I
You
mean,
know,
I was about 60 grand all in, I would say,
okay.
which is no small amount of money, and it's
Yeah, I was
probably
trying to.
increased.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So I mean, if you're going to fundraise, if you're going to crowdfund, if you're going to raise money, yeah, get started now. You know,
absolutely. Yeah, I
is the
mean,
thing because yeah, it's not a sort of cheap thing, sadly. And but my advice would be make it clear to your neurologist, and if they start poo-pooing it, look for a different one. Look for support, because there's great neurologists out there, and there's ones that are a bit, and you think, well, it's not you getting sick, pal, it's me who's getting sick, and I really want a neurologist who takes my concerns about deterioration in the long term
yeah,
serious.
you've got to advocate for yourself.
Well, that's what
Nobody
it comes
else
down
really
to.
cares about you in the same way that you do, apart from maybe my wife, to be fair. But like, it's important to advocate for yourself, and that's essentially what I did. And as I say,
It's one to one for you, and it's one to many for them. For the doctors and nurses, I understand. Yeah, they
yeah,
have to deal with loads of people, and you're just one. So you've got to make it.
you got to
You know,
make it about you.
yeah, yeah. You don't imagine that when the door shuts behind you, that they think about you anymore because they have to think about the next patient.
Well, it is. It's a little bit of a conveyor belt.
Go on, give us a sentence to sum it up for people. If somebody was sitting there going, because I know people watch these and wonder and say, what would your sentence be for somebody who is in two minds?
Get it done. It's not as bad as you think, and it's
Perfect.
life changing.
It's not as bad as you think. I'll put a colon in there. It's life changing.
Yeah, sorry, I can't count.
No, 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 no. That's quite all right. Somebody said a colon just shows you went to university. And I'm like, yeah, okay.
Yeah,
But Hamish, look, I really appreciate you coming back to the MS Guide to tell us about it. I feel like I've ground my own axe in some ways, because I have strong views on this, but it's really cool to see you back. I love the fact that it's just getting out there doing stuff and doing more than other people.
no,
I mean,
thank you
that's
very
my
much. Yeah,
attitude is I'm going to do stuff until I can't, but it's kind of feel like you're cramming it all in.
absolutely. Yeah, but I mean, that's the thing is, I wanted to do this treatment to get my life back, and I feel I've done that.